This talk is supported by Small PDF, the successful Swiss scale-up making PDF easy for over 1 billion people around the world since 2013. You may remember them from a previous podcast we hosted with their CEO, Dennis Just. Their mission is to make PDFs and life easy for people across the world, a mission made possible with their 90-plus amazing employees across Zurich, Belgrade, and Barcelona. If you want to join this fast-growing Swiss scale-up, visit smallpdf.com/Swisspreneur and apply.
The difference between Apple products and their competitors is, of course, also like brilliant engineering, the whole supply chain, operations that goes into it, also marketing, etc. But at the end of the day, I would say it's probably the design that really makes a difference there.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Raphael, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's such a pleasure to have you here in New York City today.
Yeah, great being here. We're looking out on Times Square.
Could be worse for an interview setting. You're the founder and CEO of Cron, the calendar app building the digital layer of time. Before we talk about your impressive story of building Cron and exiting Cron, I actually want to start with your personal background. Did you always know that you wanted to study computer science?
I think I knew it pretty early on. I was always a builder, designer, and software was just a medium that I felt is really going to shape the next few decades. If I was 12, 13 today, maybe this would look different. Maybe I still think it's a wonderful career, but maybe biology would be more interesting for me personally as well. But yeah, computer science was a great choice, and always kind of with an eye on design. Use that as a jumping off board.
Exactly. And during your studies, you actually also worked as a freelancer, as an independent designer. First of all, how did this design interest, where does that come from? Where did you get interested in design in the first place?
Yeah, good question. I think I like to surround myself with beautiful objects. And so it just started out by trying to imitate, recreating these objects and kind of discerning the patterns.
Wow. What was like something that you worked and imitated in that regard?
Yeah, so I was using a Windows computer at the time. Initially, I started with a Macintosh computer. We had one of those at home. But then during computer science studies, I remember using Linux and Windows quite a bit back in the day, also for gaming. And so I was never quite happy with the user interface there. And so I used to do a lot of skinning, kind of bringing the Mac aesthetics onto these computers. And Apple wasn't the company that it is today. It was much smaller. And so I remember kind of like downloading obscure Macworld keynotes. Now you can find them all on YouTube and watch Steve Jobs kind of like presenting on the stage. But back then it was much harder to find it, and so I had like this external hard drive of like all the old Macworld keynotes and kind of took screenshots from the presentations and tried to recreate the Aqua interface, etc.
Well, I still remember back in my childhood days, I also downloaded this software that would make your Windows computer look like a Mac computer. So,
exactly. Yeah.
You were basically doing that on your own.
100%. Yeah. And also reskinning, Winamp and all of these. Yeah.
Exactly. The good old times.
Yeah.
And what projects were you actually working on when you then were active as an independent, as a freelance designer? What were the projects that you focused on during that time?
Yeah, one of the things I did was pretty quickly I picked up teaching. And so during my studies, I supported myself by going back to the school that I was, so I did, originally I did like an apprenticeship in Switzerland with the Berufsmatura alongside it. And so as in undergrad, I then went back and, taught there's like computer science, math, etc., kind of to support myself. Further, I also just was building apps. I mean, the iPhone SDK wasn't really out yet, but I was already jailbreaking the phone and kind of like building things on the Mac platform, on the emerging iPhone platform. And then one of the projects was around text. And so I was building a lot of prototypes on novel ways to kind of like, write text editors on the Mac. And then that's when I got connected, I believe, on Twitter early on with the guys at Information Architects, and they were based in Japan, but one of them, or multiple of them, were Swiss. And so that's kind of the origin story of I, a Writer, where during my studies I was doing a lot of prototyping for text interfaces on the Mac, and then the iPad got launched. I went to Tokyo for a summer during my studies, took some time off, and we built, based on these designs from IA, the first IA Writer, and then launched it on the App Store in 2010. And has sold millions of copies since. So that was a good project during my studies.
That's amazing. And then I think you also got awarded for that. You told me when we were actually walking here, right? You were awarded for the work and the design. Yeah,
it definitely kind of made some waves back then. It was also like a very small scene back then. So this is 2010. The App Store just recently launched, few iPhone apps and even fewer iPad apps. And it wasn't so clear where the iPad platform would actually go in terms of kind of like interface design. The patterns weren't all explored and established yet. And so I remember IA Writer was featured in the App Store, and one of the other two features was Flipboard. And so they launched pretty much the same week as we did. And so one of the guys working in the same Tokyo office that I was in flew out to California and kind of told me a little bit about the backstory of Flipboard. And then this is a little bit jumping ahead, but like half a year later, I ended up in Palo Alto myself.
And basically, because of that initial connection, what sparked you to then go to Palo Alto, the United States, and actually work for Flipboard there?
Yeah, it was multiple things. So things with IA Writer were going, pretty well, very exciting. Journey kind of ahead there, wanted to expand to many more platforms, and I had a great time in Tokyo, learning about the culture. This is before having roaming, so I remember walking through the city without like a connected phone, and figuring things out. Like there was no word lens yet, so really like kind of reading the street signs and really as a foreigner and pretty alone there. Just figuring things out. And it was wonderful kind of to see Tokyo through these eyes, and designing alongside talented people there, meeting new people from fashion, interior design, and just like felt like very, very vibrant, the scene there. So I was very attracted to continue the work after going back to Switzerland and doing my studies and finishing my studies in Bern and Biel. At the Tech. I was very attracted to going back, but what happened was Fukushima in the meantime, right? So right around that time, the earthquake in Japan caused Fukushima to blow up, and it was an uncertain time kind of in that area. And at the same time, so that's kind of like the hardship during that time, and it affected a lot of my friends there. On the upside, Flipboard took notice of my work, and the design scene and the kind of iOS engineering scene, as I mentioned, was fairly small back then. And so I started to talk to people from Instagram, Pinterest, Flipboard, all tiny companies back then, right? And ended up half a year later, so this is early 2011, ended up in Palo Alto. I've never been to the US before at that point.
That's quite a bold move to jump into the unknown waters of, hey, I now go and work for a US company.
Yeah. Instead of moving east from Switzerland, I ended up moving west. And that's right, yeah. On a Sunday night flight, arrived at the SFO in San Francisco. Remember taking a yellow cab, this pre-Uber, pre-Lyft, taking a yellow cab down to Palo Alto. And if you ever have been kind of down like that Strip 101, the highway, I was coming from the trains in Switzerland and the future of Tokyo. And I thought like Silicon Valley must be this place with like neon signs and everything, like flying cars probably, right? Swiss boy from the Alps arriving in SFO and taking a cab down to Palo Alto. And it was like the opposite. Right. It was like all like strip malls and like auto body shops, and it looked quite kind of grungy. And so on a Sunday night, arrived down in Palo Alto, checked into the Cowper Inn, kind of like a folksy little inn. And yeah, just slept for a solid 8 hours there, and then walked down Monday morning just the street down to Emerson Street and knocked on the garage door that Flipboard was in and picked up work the next morning.
Please tell us a bit more about these early days in Palo Alto. So 2011, I think that was about the time when you arrived there. How was it to work for this garage startup Flipboard that many of us know these days, of course, But back then it was different. How were these early days? How was your work there? How was the team? How was the environment? What did you take away?
Yeah, as I mentioned, everything was much smaller. Apple was much smaller. I think the market cap of Microsoft was considerably, check me on that, but it still felt like Apple is like very much the underdog, Microsoft is much bigger, the whole scene, the tech scene was much smaller. Flipboard was so Flipboard was in downtown Palo Alto, just a few blocks off of University Avenue, where Google had their first office. Right. So a couple blocks in the other direction is where the HP, the Hewlett Packard garage was.
Garage,
and that that garage basically like that started the whole Silicon Valley scene next to Stanford there. And so it felt very, to me at least, it felt very. Fresh now looking back, still kind of nascent. And Facebook was still on the Stanford campus, just 10 minutes from us. They were maybe 400 people at that point, and we used to go there for lunch and meet kind of the early Facebook crew. And it was not clear that Facebook would be this huge company. I think Facebook and Twitter were about the same size in terms of user numbers at that time. Yeah.
And we know the rest is history, right?
Yeah, and maybe most notably also for me personally, Steve Jobs was still alive. And that to me was always like a big draw to be so close to, one of my idols. And I remember like we would always like, text each other. Slack didn't exist. We would like text each other or email each other in turn. It's like, like Steve is at the Whole Foods. Like we were like, we were on the corner of Emerson Street where there was like a Whole Foods that, he liked to go to, just like for his personal shopping. And of course we would like never like, encroach on him. But, we would kind of like, oh, Steve is at Whole Foods again. And we'd like go get our kombucha and stand in line to maybe, do like a little Steve sighting. And a lot of the people that I worked with worked directly with him before. He also visited our garage, Flipboard, and I actually ended up living very close, basically on Santa Rita Avenue, where his house is. Very very nice neighborhood, but still kind of like a modest house, like not a mansion. And so being there, knowing that Steve Jobs sleeps like 10 houses over on the same block, like that was still like gave me some adventurous energy that was just very special during that time.
Certainly a very special vibe and great timing in that regard. You mentioned you also looked at other companies like Instagram, for example. Some companies that have become mega successes afterwards. Do you regret making the decision to not go and work for them in hindsight?
Yeah, look, like if you're long enough in this scene, you always like everyone has a story where they didn't join, right. Like the thing that became huge. It's like I was talking to WhatsApp when they were in Mountain View. It's like as a first designer, they were tiny, and some of the other companies like Instagram was just the two founders, and in the years since, I've gotten to know them a little bit better, and one of the co-founders, Mike Krieger, is now was a user of Cron and congratulated me on the recent acquisition, and this is like fast forwarding a few years, but so it was great getting connected to these people, but I think you should never really regret any of these decisions. I had a wonderful years at Flipboard and met so many people that impacted my career and future choices tremendously. Learned so much, and a bunch of them ended up being at my wedding. So really friends for life.
Great. Yeah, that's probably something you cannot miss out on. That's like the best that can happen.
100%.
You then also spent still a bit time between the US and Switzerland, and went back to also freelancing again, right? I think in 2017. So why was that then also the right step for you to go more towards the independent design work again, to do your own things before then starting your own company?
Yeah, a really kind of significant chapter in between there was when I left Silicon Valley after about 4.5 years temporarily to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I went to the MIT Media Lab to both do a graduate degree as well as research. And the MIT Media Lab is like this this candy store for design technologists, where every James Bond movie has a scene where James Bond goes into the lab of Q, right? And there's like robots crawling on the floor and like new gadgets and fire and explosions left and right. And that's what I felt when I first walked into the MIT Media Lab. It's really like a space that calls itself not just interdisciplinary but anti-disciplinary, like really like open, not just combining existing fields but opening up completely new fields. Have a architect and a classically trained musician and a sensor specialist work shoulder to shoulder and see what they come up with. Have a molecular biologist and someone from the arts and maybe a generative computer designer come up with new patterns for, I don't know, like some new shoe foam or something like that. So it really felt like a special place that it just had to be there. And so I was super excited to be there as both a researcher as well as a grad student, and that's what I did there for 2 years. Took classes at MIT and cross-registered to Harvard as well. Became a TA, a teaching assistant for some of the classes as well. One of the most memorable classes was called How to Make Almost Anything, where you learn how to make almost anything, and it's super intense. The principal investigators do not like if their research assistants take this class because it's like a 100-hour commitment per week. Wow. Over a whole semester, but learned so much and produced so much, had so much output. During those 2 years, got to hang out with the guys that invented processing. This is a language that allows you to very exploratively and creatively, through code, create generative art, which now, of course, with NFTs, years later, kind of has, a whole new wave behind it. And so just really hanging out with these, kind of coming from the entrepreneurial world, kind of more more kind of like the West, California is all about kind of like creating like the spirit of creating new things, whereas the East Coast to me and MIT and Harvard and that whole area felt much more about like book smart and like in conversations you would not talk about the next social mobile app, you would actually kind of more cite the paper and talk about books and all of that. And having been exposed to that for 2 years kind of changed my design practice quite a bit, and I was just broadening up quite a bit, being interested in different things.
You had your experience, right? You worked for Flipboard, you worked for other companies before, you had your design experience, but then you decided to basically go back to the educational part to train and shape your design skills even further. Do you think that this was a necessary step that you were looking out for to then take the next step in your career, or was it also, mainly out of pure interest and being able to play around in the lab and with all these cool gadgets?
It's probably more the latter. Looking back, you can always kind of like connect the dots. So looking forward is always a little bit difficult. Where will this lead? But generally just kind of like trying to do interesting things and follow my nose. What's in, and try to have high output, produce a lot of things, hopefully of value.
Yeah. And you then decided to launch your own company. In 2020, you started Cron, basically. Legend has it that the Cron idea actually came when you and a friend of yours hacked a calendar extension. So can you talk a bit more about that, these early days, about the hack of that calendar extension?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always interesting where the overnight successes that were 5 years in the making, right?
Yeah,
So when I sent out the announcement about the next chapter for Cron, some people, including I think you, was like, oh wow, that was quick, congrats. But the overnight success is typically kind of 5 to 10 years in the making. So after MIT, did a whole bunch of different things, but one of them for quite a long time I was stepping through the idea maze. And this process of stepping through the idea maze before incorporating, before going and writing the first production level line of code, creating the first actual design that ends up in the actual app, is a long time of just kind of like exploring, user research, tinkering around with things, like smashing things together and seeing what kind of falls apart and what comes out of it. And one of the things I did during that time was I noticed that when things got really, really busy, be it during kind of my day-to-day working or as a researcher trying to balance kind of both academic duties as well as, kind of like the research, the only thing that I could kind of rely on at the end of the day was my calendar. So nothing got done unless it was on my calendar. You're laughing right now. So I thought like the calendar is kind of like an underexplored tool in my daily productivity kind of tool chest. Mm-hmm. So I noticed that people around me really love their calendar, but they hate their calendaring software. And so everyone around me kind of like, and this is not just researchers or other designers, but this is also kind of people from completely other fields, from the humanities or high achievers in sports or whatever. And they were just religious about their calendar, but all kind of hated their calendaring software. And they were, quote unquote, hacking their experience by installing all sorts of extensions and third-party apps and use, different tools to kind of like cobble together what I thought, could become potentially kind of a next generation calendaring experience. Mm-hmm. And so I contributed to this ecosystem where I was not happy with the experience I had, and basically, DOM hacked into the Google Calendar with an extension. Changing kind of the UI, I basically printed out a screenshot of Google Calendar, just like with a red marker, like marked up everything that I thought was bad and not optimal, and then started to kind of hack into it and building extension and trying things out, which was a really, really interesting time. And one of the things you asked specifically about that one extension was I always thought that there's when I look at my calendar, there's a lot of empty space. There's a lot of white. If I scroll all the way up, why is there all this empty space between midnight and 8 a.m. or between kind of like 8 p.m. and 8 a.m.? It's not a really efficient use of the screen real estate, especially kind of make the window bigger. And so the little thing that my extension did was letting you collapse the empty hours in the morning and in the evening. And this is just like a little thing that I wanted. One of like 20 things that I marked up on that screenshot with the red marker. And I believe it was hard to bring it from one computer to the other computer. So just put it on we put it on the App Store, on the Google Marketplace store without really like any marketing or anything. And then pretty much like overnight, it had 10,000 weekly active users. Wow. I was like, wow, there's something there. Yeah. Let me actually put some other projects I had on hold and really pull that thread. And that's when the whole journey towards YC started.
Well, I love that for two reasons. First of all, because you're basically solving your own problem. You said, this is not working the way I imagine it should be. I want to make it better for your own needs, basically. And the second thing, you built traction without even really focusing on it. You just like built a small solution that you used yourself, and then you got initial traction. That sort of led you the way, there might be something there. Let's explore that further.
Yeah, absolutely. Just build stuff and get it out there. I think that's really the best way to start anything.
And then actually mentioned YC, Y Combinator. You went through the Winter 20 batch. So how did the selection process there happen? You said you had some initial traction, the 10,000 active users there. Did you then just like reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? What happened there?
Yeah. So at this point, we are already over a year in the journey, right? And it's now end of 2019, right? So that's kind of where I consider, somewhere like 2017, 18 is kind of where the clock for Cron basically started. And so now it's 2019, and I've done a bunch of user research in the meantime also. And it wasn't clear that it was a calendar. I was interested in kind of AI guided, productivity, to-do lists. It's explored a lot of different things and built quite a bit of, prototypes there. But it was really that browser extension that gave me the conviction to answer a few questions, basically for myself. So YC Winter 2020 batch was already it was already over. It was already closed, the application process. But I thought the questions that they have, and this is still the original, original 8 questions that PG, Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, wrote down 15 years ago. It's still the same questions. I thought they're so poignant, they're so good and honest. I can't remember them top of my head right now, but they're basically where do you get your first users from? Mm-hmm. It's just very, very sort of clear questions that really make you think, like, okay, so if I don't know who's my buyer, who are the first 10 users, then maybe I'm in the founder problem fit is maybe, or the founder market fit is maybe not right? And so I took these questions and really sat down for about 2-3 days in Bern and just blocked out the time to answer these questions for myself. What would it look like in this calendaring space? And so I knew that the deadline was already passed, but really, invested in this exercise and felt really, really good coming out of this exercise. Like, there's really something there. I want to get this going now, and I wanted to, do this with a co-founder team, etc. And so I started talking to a few friends back from MIT, back from the Silicon Valley years, etc. Some people in Switzerland, and wanted to basically get something going. And timing didn't quite align, and I flew out to California to have a few conversations, and timing didn't quite align. But I really wanted to start with a founding team. But then at the end of the day, I was like, let's get this going. So I submitted this late to YC. And they reached out when I was in California, like, hey, we're actually wrapping up our interviews in Paris right now. You're from Switzerland, so hop on a train, come over, and we're gonna, interview you. This is really interesting to us. And they didn't know that I was in California at the time. So I headed back to Switzerland, took a TGV over to Paris. Took the interview with Dalton and a couple other partners. It was very intimidating, kind of having like a bunch of partners kind of lined up on one side of the table, and me, the solo founder, no team, no product, no company, no landing page, nothing on the other side of the table. But I basically walked them through, that exercise that I did for those 3 days, and kind of tell them hey, look, I think nothing really has happened in this space. I think, there's 1 billion people using Calendar. I think time is the most valuable resource we have. And here are the things I hacked together in the past few months. And here are a couple new prototypes and sketches that I did on DGV here. And so I'm excited to get going. And I'm going to do this, with or without YC. Thanks for your time. Bye. And that was the interview.
Wow, quite a nice pitch.
Yeah.
What do you think? What convinced them? I mean, it's hard to say that from your perspective because you're the founder, but what convinced them? Was it the market? Was it your design skills, the traction? Probably a mix of all of them?
I don't know. It was probably a mix. But they definitely like demonstrating that you can build stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't really know. But Dalton called me, pretty much right after that. It's like, hey, we think this could be huge. Come out to California. We're starting the batch in a few weeks. And that was, that was December 2019. And so I followed the call and rented out my apartment in Bern at the time, and went back to California for that was like January 2020.
Before we talk about that experience, I quickly want to focus on the market, because the calendar market, it's very crowded. There are so many apps out there, so many solutions.
Yeah.
You always saw what you would do differently, what didn't exist in the market yet, to give you the experience that you were seeking, basically. Were you never discouraged that it's such a crowded market that yet another solution is probably not going to make any difference?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, if you look at the calendars from the incumbents, it's like Apple, Microsoft, Google. There hasn't really been any innovation since Lotus 123 at all, right? What Google did was basically taking Microsoft and putting it on the web. So it's more a technology kind of platform move, but not really like a use case move or innovating the product, the use case. And so there has been quite a bit of innovation in the calendaring space adjacent to kind of the core calendars. Mm-hmm. So things like Calendly, kind of like the whole culture around sending booking links and opening up your calendar availability. There has been more innovation in adjacent spaces to calendars around kind of optimization, so team internal kind of optimizations of your team's time, for example, Clockwise. And a bunch of other kind of smaller innovations kind of adjacent to the core calendars. And my thesis is always hey, let's do the hard thing first. Let's build a calendar, and then all these pretty big companies like Calendly, for example, they seem more like a feature to me. And then, we can basically just, once we have the calendar, we can roll these out as a feature. So I was never worried about monetization, because all these, scheduling, etc. features, they demonstrated that it's people are very used to pay kind of the typical, $15, $20 per seat per month SaaS price for these extra services.
Yeah. Wow, that's really, I love it when this happens in an interview. It's like a new perspective on the world. Something that nobody ever thought before, probably before of you.
Yeah, maybe.
So you then flew to San Francisco for the YC batch. What was your experience like? What did you take away from the YC experience?
Yeah, it was great. So this is pre-pandemic, and YC is really a great place to get started. It is truly a startup accelerator. I think it's not an incubator. It's not anything you couldn't get online. All the resources are online. What it does is it really just accelerates you. It puts you in a room with a bunch of other people that have the same goal. It's like, make as much progress as possible over the course of 10 weeks. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of those 10 weeks, you get a bunch of VCs from Silicon Valley and elsewhere into a room, and all these founders into a room, and they get to pitch, and then there's some matchmaking, and then you're off to the races. That was the plan, but then the pandemic hit. So initially, the first few weeks, it was still, dinners down in Mountain View twice a week. I was living up in San Francisco because I knew the city well, had friends there, and I was working out of the AWS loft, and had a little WeWork there as well. And it was just, a cranking, and I kind of had to, because I was a solo founder, I kind of had to be like Batman. It's like, it's basically like, doing sales and customer discovery during the day, and coding and designing at night. And that was just like, that was my cycle for the first, couple months. It was pretty intense. I just went like just really like all in, dropped everything else. And was mostly kind of talking to other YC founders as my early customers, because they were my perfect kind of target audience. And so pretty quickly took Google Calendar, turned into like pro mode, put it in like an Electron app, and started selling it for $10 a pop. And it's like had other founders like sign up, and pretty quickly went to market validation. And started to use some of the funds that YC gave me to hire some contractors. And so, yeah, that was the first few weeks.
Really, yeah, speeding you up, as you said.
Yeah.
Was there something that surprised you from going through the YC program?
Just the energy. I don't know whether I was surprised by that, but the energy is really, really fantastic. Maybe one of the stunning, more than surprising, but one of the stunning things is that the first welcome day of YC, everyone gets together or got together in the big orange room, they call it, in Mountain View, and you just look statistically like, I don't know, it was maybe like it was about 200 companies, something like that, so like 500 founders, 400 founders, something like that, and statistically you knew that you're in the same room, with at least 10 unicorns, and probably like 3 decacorns, and probably next Mark Zuckerberg is in this room, right? I don't know exactly kind of like the statistics, but if you just kind of look at the successes of the batches and all the new companies being created, like there must be kind of like one of the next, Stripe, Colson Brothers, or the next Brian Chesky, or next Mark Zuckerberg is like probably here in this room. Could be the guy next to me, could be the girl next to me, could be me. I don't know. And so that is very stunning. That energy.
Does that also have a negative impact sometimes, that you feel a lot of pressure?
I think I do pretty well with pressure, so for me it didn't have a negative impact, but I can see how maybe for some people that there's a bit of peer pressure. On the other hand, you kind of maneuvered yourself into that specific kind of situation if you know that you're maybe rather take more time or just work a little bit differently at a different pace, such as, for example, like, I don't know, maybe like you're bootstrapping, which doesn't mean that you're moving slower, but maybe you just like a different pace, different gear, different scene, then this would maybe not be what I would recommend. But I think there's really people from all walks of life there, people of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds, and so there's not everyone looks like you or me there. So
I think
everyone,
that's a very good thing.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Startup Nights 2022. On November 3rd and 4th, you'll have the chance to showcase your startup, get inspired, meet investors, and network with like-minded peers at the 6th annual edition of Startup Nights in Winterthur. Check out startup-nights.ch to learn more and register for the event. You actually launched Cron in a semi-stealth mode, so you basically hand out invitations in exchange for feedback. Why was that the right launch strategy for you, instead of going full-blown marketing launch and big press releases and paid advertising campaigns, etc.?
Yeah, I really thought I wanted to optimize on learning. And so I had this, because we had a pretty big waiting list, because we did have some initial kind of marketing success, words just kind of, it was not marketing, it was more just the word, made the rounds on Twitter. It's like, hey, I'm using Cron, it's amazing. And so that just kind of worked its magic. And so we had a pretty long waiting list. And so what I decided to do was basically I had this fine knob where I could just turn how many people I would want to let in every day or week, and initially this was really on the order of a handful of people a day, because I wanted to talk to every single one, during onboarding, because a lot of stuff didn't quite work yet, and it's a lot of hand wavy stuff, and then also after the first day, hey, are you actually going back to your incumbent solution? What was the most valuable feature? And so really tight hand holding, and I would fix bugs. Sometimes I would just prop my laptop right next up to them and immediately change the thing that they were telling me. Is hey, hit Command R, and boom, it was already on their labs. Awesome. Extremely quickly iterations. And so had I spent a bunch of time kind of preparing a marketing page, and then seeing hundreds or thousands of people sign up, and then they sort of use your product but don't quite stick with it, they sort of like it but don't really love it, they wouldn't actually pay for it. I wanted to avoid that. I really just wanted to know exactly what's working, what isn't working, and would they actually pay for it. And so initially it was just a few people a day, then maybe ramped up to tens of people a day, and then later wrapped up to hundreds of people a day. And so I always kind of kept, as I had more help, more people on the team, I could kind of increase that number and still absorb, kind of keep the bandwidth high from our end. And so I still wanted to be tuned into all the different conversations. I still wanted to know, just on day one when I was actually sitting next to them with the laptop, I still wanted to know, okay, so 100 new people, what features are they using? More at scale now with instrumentation, kind of amplitude and whatnot. But I still want to know exactly kind of what is the user journey look like? Where do they churn? What is the most valuable feature? What do they come back for? And so that's how I think I navigated pretty quickly to product market fit.
Yeah, staying very close to users and absorbing their feedback. Sometimes I can imagine having that setup, it can also be very difficult to then prioritize what you're going to build and what feedback is actually valuable for you to build into the product, and what something is that you should just not build into the product. Say, good idea, but probably not a good fit. How do you make this differentiation?
Yeah, I always kind of picked about 50% fulfilling user requests and 50% just executing on my vision.
Okay. Well, that sounds simple. I can imagine it's a bit more tougher in practice.
Yeah. You always need to, let some fires burn, prioritize ruthlessly. Of course, anything that is a operational, kind of DevOps, servers are down, that stuff, you just jump on. If there's a serious bug, data loss, that's you drop every roadmap for that. Sure. But then when it comes kind of to working on your roadmap and what makes the roadmap, I found the sort of half rule of, it's do 50% of what users kind of ask you to do. Mm-hmm. So they kind of almost pull pull the product out of you if you just build what they want, right? But then like curate it very carefully, otherwise you're kind of, just attaching a bunch of features to a non-cohesive picture. And so half of the time really execute on your vision. What do you want? Why are you building this? What do you want it to become?
Let's also talk about some other challenges. You're a solo founder. We mentioned before you sort of had to be Batman to do it all, yourself in the early days. Solo founder, is that something that you would recommend that you'd do again, looking back at your journey now?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I didn't set out to found Cron solo, and it wasn't for the lack of trying to kind of like have a team of co-founders. I really love working in teams, but it was just like the timing where I just wanted to get going, and so that was kind of the backstory there. I think there's advantages and disadvantages. I formulate, would I do it again? It's working out, so yes, but would I recommend it? I don't know. But I did formulate some thoughts on that. I don't know yet whether they are, accurate, but one thought that kind of crossed my mind over the past few years was solo founding something in the very, very early days might have some benefits because I was just so quick. Because I never had to talk to anyone, like everything just happened like in one brain, like super high bandwidth. Like I just could observe something from a customer, and then I could just observe it. Didn't have to talk to anyone, just synthesize it, come up with an idea, put it in the design, put it in the code, ship it, tell them to hit Command R. It was a single loop, and I did that so many times, so quickly. That really started to compound extremely quickly in the beginning. And so even just having, 3 co-founders there kind of like, okay, so what did you hear? What should we do? Where's the design? Can you build it? I think that that iteration speed going from like, okay, this took 20 minutes to like, this took 2 days, multiply that by 100. It just gets you to a completely different place after, a week, right? And so in the very, very early days, kind of like building the earliest prototypes, earliest things, I now think maybe kind of like solo kind of spearheading that might actually be quite good. Then I think really building kind of like the early team and kind of like the seed stage company, I think is quite hard as a solo founder personally. I know other people that did that quite well as a solo founder, but I really think I would love to have co-founders during that phase. And then sort of like later stage, I think in the end there's typically like kind of one founder, if it's a co-founding team or solo founder, it's like the founder, like that kind of crystallizes to be like the one kind of like CEO or just like the one kind of founder at the helm. It's like if you look at the public companies, it's typically like kind of like one person that really ended up running the company. And so I think being a solo founder then, makes that very easy, like who it is.
Sure.
So in my mind, the TLDR here is that at the very, very beginning, solo founder is kind of neat, and eventually it's kind of like one person again, most of the times. But in that middle part, probably like a co-founding team is really awesome. But look, like both can work in both cases.
Sure. I mean, there are many examples, in
Absolutely.
both setups.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to talk about is you started in the US as a Swiss guy, coming from the Berner Oberland.
Yeah.
How do you actually make it in the United States with your startup company? How do you find the right people, the right talent, the right starting point? Because you, for example, you attracted top tier investors. You raised a 3.5 million seed round with people like Gary Tan or Ella Chill, Jeff Weiner, etc. Like top-notch people invested in your company. That's quite difficult, I can imagine, to come to the United States as a Swiss guy without any network at first to then get these people to invest in you.
Yeah, I never felt at a huge disadvantage or advantage being Swiss. Just do as your mother told you. Is like be nice, work hard, and create valuable things, and people will notice. And so over the kind of my decade or so in Silicon Valley, there's always met people, and for example, one of the seed station investors in Cron was an intern at Flipboard, and he's now running huge SaaS company, Figma. Hi Dylan. And so it's like
you also have to get to know these people, right? Or is it more that the word spreads if you build something valuable, if you build something that people want to use or see potential in?
Yeah, I think nobody will or should invest just because you're friends or get along or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely kind of is both sides. An existing network, of course, is valuable, already knowing some of the people, but then you got to build something of value and really paint an exciting vision. On top of that, I think, so I raised the seed round for Cron in March and April 2020, right? So actually our YC batch got cut short. There was no demo day, and it hasn't transitioned to remote yet. Like March 2020, we're all just like figuring out Zoom basically, if you remember, and so one of the things during that time when I raised the seed was I very quickly kind of like switched tack. I realized like, okay, this is not happening anymore, and I went on this like crazy 100 hours of like basically no sleep, take all the calls, like Zoom, let's go out and raise this round. And one of the things I just adapted very quickly is like, I was like, hey, like look, we're building software for the future workplace. So this is not only a bad thing, this new reality. This might actually be an opportunity. I believe in Chinese and Japanese, the kanji, like the sign for crisis, is the same as for opportunity, and I love that a lot. And so I was it's kind of like saying like, hey, like there's definitely like light at the end of the tunnel. Right now we're all figuring this out, but I believe this is a big opportunity. And also just like kind of projecting personally, everyone was rightly so kind of like freaking out. Whereas like, I think we got this. I'm gonna do good work here, and I got this. So let's go. And so that's how the seed round came together.
And in your case, how did you get the network, the introduction to these very high profile people? Did you know them from Flipboard before, as with the Figma founder, or was YC helpful, or how did you do that? How did you pull that off?
Yeah, so typically YC is very helpful during the demo day, but because that didn't happen, right, I kind of felt more on my own. They helped with kind of like, some strategies in terms of like how to put together a round, etc. But in terms of like intros, that all happened a little bit more on my own and through kind of the network. I didn't have time to put a seed deck together. So I raced the entire round without a deck. Wow. It was all just conversations, telling them, it's like what I've built in the past few weeks and months, and kind of how I thought about this problem space over the past few years. Screen shared my screen. It's like, hey, look, here's what I built. This is a demo of the product as today. Wrote first line of code in January. We're now mid-March. This is what it is. And I just gave them a product demo and showed them where this will go in the next few years, and then signed the DocuSign and raced around that way. It also happened still like it's still an impersonal business still. Mm-hmm. Like, I still had like coffees at, Sightglass down in Soma. It's like, I think I got the first angel check there. And then on the ride share, ride home, I got like another call and it's like, hey, like Gary wants to meet with you. And then, like this person heard, and it's like, oh, there's like this other person. And there's like going to be Monday morning meeting with Sequoia. And it's like, there's like things happen very quickly, and there's a lot of still kind of like in person, and it's like meet me, at the bar day. Like it's still like a small scene, and I did feel there was still like a good amount of advantage actually being there and actually kind of like meeting with the people, etc. So yes, it was a lot over Zoom, and these days even more so. You can definitely raise your seed round from anywhere, but I felt there was still an advantage of having met at least once some of these people in person.
Yeah. And your slide deck was basically the product.
Yes, exactly. No slides. It was just like, hey, let me quickly share the screen. Can you see the screen all right? Here's what I built, or what I and the team started to build, and here's where we're going. Here's a bunch of sketches. What it's going to look like in the future, and yeah, exactly. So that was
super valuable.
That was the pitch. In general, like even with if I had the time to prepare a deck, of course I would. But even then, I wouldn't let a deck get in between the entrepreneur and the investor. It's something you kind of like inject in between two people wanting to have a conversation, getting to know one another. So I would still recommend not starting necessarily with a deck, a conversation.
great perspective. And talking about leverage, so in that regard, your product was the leverage to attract the investors, basically. Your design skills, your design of Cron can also be seen as a leverage to attract users, to do the user acquisition part for you, because it's an amazing product, something that they have never seen before, and therefore word spreads, they invite their friends, their co-workers to also use Cron. Do you agree on that view that design, great design, can be a very powerful leverage for user acquisition?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look at Apple, for example, right? The difference between Apple products and their competitors is, of course, also, like brilliant engineering, the whole supply chain, operations that goes into it, also marketing, etc. But at the end of the day, I would say it's probably the design that really makes a difference there. And I believe for software, that's the same.
So one thing that I'm also particularly interested in is your business model. You didn't really monetize Cron, but you mentioned before you saw different add-ons like Calendly, etc., where people pay for add-ons for services that you could build in your product. Was that your monetization strategy, or what else did you have planned to monetize Cron and build a sustainable business around it?
Yeah, to me it was always very clear from the beginning that I wanted to not make Cron like a tool, like almost like luxury tech. There's like a little bit of a trend. Some of the tools kind of like more luxury tech. It's like very expensive, only for individuals. I always wanted to make it something accessible to as many people as possible, a billion people, right? There's for example, there's the Eames design studio of Charles and Ray Eames, design famous chairs, etc. And a lot of people now know them for like their fancy launch chair with the ottoman. It's like 7,000 Swiss francs or dollars or something like that. But actually, the ethos of their studio was the best for the most for the least. Or the best for the least for the most. Mm-hmm. But basically what it means is, we want to have the best, like the best quality, materials, processes, etc. We want to have it for the most people. We want to really have everyone access to it, and so hence we want it for the least amount of money. Mm-hmm. And so they came up with new ways of bending plywood, which is considered more like a cheap material, right? And that really always hit home for me. Like I want to make, the best for the most for the least. And what that means in software, because we have, basically like 0% marginal cost, right? You just add a bunch of servers. But it's really all in the R&D, in the development of the product. But once you have it, you can basically, whether one person or a billion people use it, mm-hmm. You don't have to use resources of the earth, and so I was always attracted by this idea. Always wanted to kind of give the core away for free, and then a very clear path to monetization with some of these extra services that professionals and teams were already used to pay for.
Yeah, wonderful. And why did you decide to not charge anything from the beginning?
Well, so actually I flipped it around. Like I intend to not charge for that exact reason, because I want to make it accessible. But I actually did charge in the very, very early days because I wanted to keep the barrier extremely high, so that I can really get honest answers from people churning, and is this really worth $10 a month or $15 or whatever. So the only money that I ever charged that Cron ever had as a revenue was from the earliest days, and then I turned that off over time, and it just became freemium at that point.
Great.
Or even just completely free, right? We didn't have plans yet.
Yeah. And now if we look at this year, in 2022, you then got acquired by Notion. Like many people was like, wow, that was like super fast exit. As you heard, it was a bit longer in the making than we see from the outside. First of all, tell us a bit how you met Notion co-founder Ivan. I think you had a great first conversation when you met in the beginning. Yeah,
it was again kind of one of those, it's just being in San Francisco, having coffee, that person, this person, and then things kind of one thing leads to another. It was another one of those where I was in San Francisco because Cron was basically designed in Switzerland, built in California, and so my team was out there, Mountain View, San Francisco, and I was always very frequently there, even during the pandemic, and was at the beginning of this year. I was in San Francisco, and one of my investors was connecting Ivan, the co-founder of Notion, and me, just for coffee, and we were both. I think it even started earlier actually when Ivan and I were on an email thread. It's like, hey, it's like, I'm a DAU of your product. It's like, hey, I'm a DAU of your product. Love your product. And so that's how it started, I believe. It's like, yeah, so I don't know exactly where the genesis is, but in the end we ended up getting coffee, and we just hit it off. We're jamming on design, very similar background, both design engineers, coding and designing, and felt that not just did we get along extremely well on a personal level, but I was interested in building. So our users were asking us for integrations with Notion. Anyway, so I was curious, kind of like, hey, could they maybe give us some like private API access or something? And then, Ivan was obviously very interested in kind of like the time component anyway, like even without Cron, right? So we were kind of like interested in each other's areas anyway. And then once we got together, we also realized a little bit like what's the alignment of our mission and vision, etc. And so for Cron, it's always like I want to live in a world where everyone makes the most of their time. And so with Cron, I really want to build, the software that can move us a little bit closer to that, world where everyone can make the most of their time, whatever it means to them, starting by building the very best next generation calendar. And so leading to then build the kind of time layer of the internet. That's kind of like the 10-year mission for Cron. And for Notion, it's really all about making software tool making ubiquitous. So being able to have all these primitives, all these Lego bricks, and letting people assemble them in ways to build new software. There's only like a few million software engineers in the world, kind of people that can actually create mold the tools that we use. But there's billions of people that are using software. So how can we kind of like flip that around? How can we let more people make the tools that they are using? And so time is one of those very fundamental Lego bricks for these kind of things. Just like you have tables, you have time, you have the written word, the page, kind of documents, databases, and all sorts of things. And so I kind of felt very aligned, like how we were thinking about things, and Cron almost felt like Notion to me felt like a superset of what I wanted to accomplish with Cron. So I felt very ambitious, kind of vague but ambitious, and so I was a fan.
When was the first moment that the topic of a potential acquisition came up?
Yeah, it was during one of our chats. I mean, it was interesting. Like the first kind of coffee turned into us ending up at 3 a.m. in the morning, like still talking about like design history and artists we like and inspirations we have, etc. So that went pretty deep pretty quickly. But then it was like it was just talking about how we could potentially work closer together. And then at some point it was just like, hey, what would this look like if we worked even closer together? Right. And I was like, what do you mean? And so that's kind of where that thread took root.
Was an exit always the goal for you and Cron?
I mean, some sort of exit, and it's like IPO or acquisition, like kind of like the two types of successful exits that you have basically as a startup company. And so in that sense, yes, some exit was always the goal. Was like a relatively quick exit the goal, like not at all. Was an acquisition exit, being acquired the goal? Like no, I think going IPO is like obviously fantastic as well. Here, like a lot of things aligned very neatly, relatively quickly, and so even though it was not a goal, it was a very attractive option.
And can you reveal some numbers on the deal? Of course, everybody's so curious, like, how did the deal look like? For how much did they acquire you? Any number that you can share?
Yeah, we don't share any numbers publicly on the deal, and I was talking a little bit to other founders and people. It's like, so how do you make the decision to share or not share? And I think really like the only reason, I mean, there's some regulatory, like for some mega deals, if I don't know, like Time Warner buys X, and there's maybe some regulatory aspects to it. But for other things, like it came down mostly to kind of like, I think, basically like ego, right? Like just like being able to say like, and we decided to like we didn't share any numbers on the deal.
So let me ask differently, without sharing any number, the timing it was a challenging market environment, right? Many startups were like reporting down rounds or had difficulties to raise money.
It actually wasn't yet at the time.
Okay.
Right.
When you were talking about
when we signed the term sheet,
okay.
it was still the heyday.
Okay, that's good. So ask differently, your investors, you yourself, were you happy with the outcome from a financial perspective?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. So now we of course also wonder what happens after the acquisition. So you still work on Cron, but you're now part of Notion, obviously.
Yeah.
What can we expect? How will you develop the product? What new features and changes will happen over time?
Yeah, so we are continuing executing on the roadmap, just as we were with Cron, and we're basically just getting more resources faster. Right, hiring is super challenging. As a small team has always been like a big challenge. It takes up a huge amount of time with the founder, but I also love to design and love to build, and so now we can kind of like plug into like a whole engine, a whole machinery there. So it just means like, everything we wanted to do, just, faster and working with the talented folks over at Notion as well. One thing that we will do eventually is kind of bring it more under the umbrella of Notion. So probably, gonna do a rebrand. I'm excited about myself. It's kind of like Notion Calendar. I think Notion has a fantastic brand. I love the Cron brand as well. But that's something we're gonna do once we get closer with integrations and all of that. But right now we're just executing on our roadmap.
Great. And for you personally, how does this exit change your life? What's next for you, Raphael?
Yeah, so it changed. So next for me is Cron, is Cron, Notion Calendar. So there's really not much changing there. I think it's just gonna get bigger faster. Mm-hmm. I most recently just moved to New York myself to be part of the growing Notion office here. Headquarters are in California. We're gonna open more offices internationally as well. So there has been kind of like personal change there. Other than that, I'm trying to keep my my life like pretty similar as before. I'm love working with computers and and sitting at my computer all day, every day, crafting software.
With the exit, usually you also make some money as a founder, obviously, right? Is there any purchase or investment that you made with the exit of your company?
Yeah, I haven't. I always try to kind of surround myself with, beautiful, high quality objects. If I have no money or if I have money. And so even when I was a student, like I would like save up or even like work extra jobs to like buy one really well designed, high quality item. And make kind of like investments in that way. I also think there's just like too much stuff in the world, too many wasteful, kind of like, we waste too many resources with too many items. And so I've always had few high quality items in my life, expensive items sometimes. And so even if I had no money. And so I haven't acquired anything since the acquisition, but I had already things that I kind of cherish from way back.
Great. So to wrap up our conversations, we like to ask some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to either give you a short question or different options to choose from, and you have to answer in one sentence, ideally.
All right, I'll try my best.
Let's see. You ready?
Ready.
First one, New York or San Francisco?
All right, so New York for the hustle, San Francisco for the spirit. How about that?
I like that. Good combination. What's your favorite book on design?
Rastersysteme by Josef Müller-Brockmann.
And we're also actually going to put a thread on your Twitter account in our show notes, because there you have a whole list of more books that you recommend.
That's right. Yeah, when I cleaned out my burn apartment, I took a photo of a bunch of kind of like a selection of my favorite design books. Yeah.
Design, development, or marketing?
You put me on a spot. So I really think you need to execute all three on the highest level to have an impactful product, best in class. But at the end of the day, I'm a designer through and through.
Fair point. What do you wish you could be more organized about?
So many things. Books I read, right? Like I think Goodreads is such a missed opportunity. Yeah. Or the people I meet, there's some interesting stuff happening kind of in the personal CRM space, etc. And then surprisingly maybe, of course, also my time. That's why we're building Cron.
Great. And without Cron, in a world with no Cron, would you prefer a digital calendar or a paper planner?
I think there's not really a choice. You can't really participate in the modern workplace professionally without a digital calendar. So I feel like there's not really a choice. And this is also why I think it's such a huge opportunity to build the next generation calendar, because it's basically for 1 billion people.
Exactly. And the last one for you, United States or Switzerland?
All right, so I'm gonna leave you with a picture there.
Okay.
That depicts kind of how I always went about life and about my design practice as well, and also how I think about these two countries. Keep your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground.
I see where that is coming from. That's a beautiful sentence to end the conversation. Raphael, thank you so much for coming on this show. Lots of success and all the best with whatever you're tackling with Cron or potentially new companies in the future. All the best. We're very excited to see what you're building.
Thank you so much, Silvan.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.